Greetings, YouTube. Please ignore the fan noises. It's warm where I am. Um, it's important to make sure that we individually are not being wasteful. It's always been important that we did that. It's just that humanity hasn't really cared about it at all until the real, quite recent present. And most people just still don't. But make no mistake, your personal carbon footprint is minuscule. If every single person as an individual were to do everything in their power to reduce their carbon footprint to the absolute minimum, I'm just strip every carbon producing thing out of their life, that would bring down our current carbon issues by about 3%. That's but your carbon footprint accounts for about 3% of the carbon issues we are currently experiencing. 71% of our carbon problems, the carbon that is being pumped into our atmosphere and turning into a giant blanket, which is keeping the heat in, is being produced by 100 specific companies who have names and addresses and CEOs that have names and addresses. Just saying. And the idea that your carbon footprint is incredibly important, I mean, it's monumentally important, is something that big oil came up with. BP and all the other big oil producers came up with the idea that if they could shift the onus of a carbon impact onto the shoulders of individual people, that would kind of shift that responsibility off of them. People would be concerned about their own carbon footprint, and again, do what you can, rather than people looking at big oil and saying, hey, you guys are producing almost all of the carbon out there. Industry is producing almost all of the carbon out there. And the difference between the 71% produced by those companies and the 3% produced by people in between there is things like farming, and there are lots of smaller groups, categories that fall between the 71 and the 3%. Farming produces a lot, particularly livestock can produce, like pigs and cows. Cattle can produce a lot of methane, which is a greenhouse gas. Not a carbon necessarily, but still a greenhouse gas. And but the reality is that 71% of it is being produced by corporations, which is one of the reasons I am so incredibly anal retentive when it comes to people at work making sure we shut everything down. Because if you leave the motor on a machine and you've gone to break, or you're gone home for the weekend and you just left the motor running, that motor is going to produce a lot more carbon than most things that your average person does at their house, because it's a big industrial motor. And I have presses at work that if you don't manually turn the motor off, they will run forever. Some of the presses have timers, so like 15 minutes after you walk away, everything will shut itself off. I have a couple of presses that if you blink, and the motors will shut off for no reason. It's kind of annoying. But yeah, quite a few of my presses don't do that. So I am anally retentive about that, as well as all the fans that we use, both for the parts and for our bodies. The lights that we use, which are fairly strong, turn those off. You're not using them, shut them down, go to break, go home, whatever. Don't leave stuff on. Because I understand that all of the things that we use, the heaters that heat up inserts and all of our equipment, produces a lot more carbon than your average household is going to. So I try to have an impact by making sure that all the people in my cell shut their shit down. They get really tired of me saying this over and over again. And I often will point out, if you're tired of me telling you this, there's an easy solution to that. None of them ever picked up on that yet. But corporations are the ones to blame. Corporations are the cause of all of our major problems in the world today, particularly in America, because they have bought the government. They have bought the government, and the government has allowed them to poison and to pollute and to maim and kill people, all without repercussions. If when a employee were to be severely injured, the person in charge of that facility and the person in charge of that corporation were charged with assault, well, maybe they might get some safety regulations in place. If when someone died on their property, maybe they might look into seeing out why, because they might get stuck with the manslaughter. All right? I have a coworker of mine who went to brake and died in the parking lot. Had a heart attack right there in his truck. And you're probably thinking, well, how is the company liable for that? Well, our society is liable for that. Why? Because he had some of the worst dental hygiene I've ever seen in my entire life. Absolute angel of a human. He was a great human being. I really miss him. He was a nice guy. And taking care of a wife who was on her downward spiral from cancer. So he was her entire support network, and now he was dead because he couldn't afford to get his teeth fixed or removed and replaced with dentures. He just couldn't. All of his money went into taking care of his wife. Now, if we had universal health care, his wife would have been sorted out, his dental problems would have been sorted out, and he might still be alive. That's a bigger issue. But I can tell you right now, the company-supplied healthcare didn't cut it. Didn't give him enough coverage. So I do put the onus of his death on corporations. Because corporations have fought universal healthcare because corporations want their healthcare plans as a bargaining chip. They want to be able to use that as a threat. So yeah, I blame corporations for that. Just like I blame corporations for the myth of your carbon footprint, and I blame corporations for all of the greenhouse gases being pumped into our atmospheres. We've known for a very long time, decades, that greenhouse gases were a severe problem. And the first people to know that were the corporations committing those egregious crimes against our planet. And then they spent millions, hundreds of millions of dollars making sure that that information never came to light, making sure that all of the politicians were in their pockets, and then doing everything they can to push the narrative that it's the individual's problem and not the corporate problem. I think that every single person in the entire petrochemical industry, from the moment that was first known by them till now, every single executive of those corporations should be in prison. All of them, for crimes against humanity. Not to mention bribery, but we allow bribery in my country. We call it campaign donations. So yeah, do what you can. Recycle what you can. Be as energy efficient as you can. If you can afford to get an electric vehicle and it fits your lifestyle, get an electric vehicle. Get a hybrid if you can. Yeah, do what you can. But don't think for a second that all of your efforts are going to save us. They'll help, but it's not the solution. The solution is making the corporations pay and pay, pay, and pay. And better yet, jailing the people in charge of them for what they've done to our planet.